So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, broadcast and recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. I want a damn jetpack. I want a damn jetpack. Is that so hard to understand? You know, Friday night, there was actually a guy on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. He had one, and his plan was to use it to fly around Hollywood High's football field in Los Angeles, and then he was going to land on the roof of the Jimmy Kimmel studio. It didn't work. He got a few feet off the ground, and that may have been jumping. It's not really clear from all the smoke that he built up. But he had a jetpack. I think everyone who wants a jetpack and has the balls to use one should have one. Maybe it's a guy thing. I also want to see a man walk on Mars in my lifetime. Not me, mind you, but some guy. And it's not like I'm asking for some silly flying car like in the Back to the Future movies. No, come on. Look, that would be, well, silly, right? And while we're at it, I want to drive a really cool car that doesn't look like every fourth car on the road. I don't know. Is that too much to ask? Well, Mac Montandon knows exactly what I'm after. He wrote the book, Jetpack Dreams, one man's up and down, but mostly down, search for the greatest invention that never was. Okay? Let's see how crazy I really am. Mac, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hey, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to talk to another guy who knows exactly what it is to want a damn jetpack.
Yeah, and you know we're far from alone. As I write about in the book, there are guys all over the world tinkering away, trying to build their own machines. And you mentioned, or you said maybe it's a guy thing, and I think to a large degree it is. However, especially since the book came out, I've heard from a number of women who also have share the obsession with us.
Well, these days there's just as many women that are kind of off the hook as men, I guess.
I guess so.
What is the deal, though? I mean, why do what is our attraction to these things? You know, when I saw the title of your book, I knew exactly what it had to be about. I mean, I listed some of the other things I'd like to see. Right. Another one on the list for me would be commercial space exploration. I don't know what on earth, and I know that it's the same kind of thing. There's guys out there, like the guy I think one of the guys who started PayPal is out there with a rocket company. Yeah, I mean, what's wrong with us?
Well, I think that a couple things are wrong with us. Well, more than a couple, but the main couple having to do with these kinds of fascinations and obsessions. I think, all the things you mentioned, whether it's flying car or Mars exploration or jetpacks, certainly we sort of encounter these ideas at a very impressionable age. Whether however old you are, if you came of age during the space age or you're a 12-year-old now, chances are that's when you're first sort of becoming aware of these possibilities, and they're magic. They're presented in a way where it's like, this is magic that could actually be. And so it's a very powerful moment when you come across it for the first time and have that realization. And I think it really sears into an impressionable mind at that age. So there's that happening. And then I think also, specifically talking to the jetpack thing, I think that there's just something inherent to human nature, something wound up in our DNA that it involves just an innate passion for flight. There's a reason I think that so many dreams, literal dreams, involve flying, and it's just seems to have been that way forever. From whether it's Da Vinci or the Icarus myth or what have you. As far as you can go back, there are examples of of very powerful images of flight that have just been part of the human experience. So when you combine all that, we're talking about some serious forces that make folks want this stuff.
Let me give out our phone number in case there's some other nuts out there like us who are daydreaming about jetpacks or rockets or, hey, like I said, the flying cars. I think that's a little silly, but if that's your thing, if you've got a comment or question for Mac Montandon, am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
You just got closer. I think the first time was a little off, but Montandon, yeah. So
Montandon.
But trust me, you won't be the first to butcher it. So
all right,
whatever you come up with is good.
All right, so call up and talk to Mac, author of Jetpack Dreams. Tell us your own stories. 1-646-595-3135. Of course, as always, call while we're live here on the air because, when the show's over, I'm going to be putting on a kite, and I'm going to attempt to jump off the roof, and I don't know exactly what Mac is going to be doing. It's funny. I recorded the Kimmel Show Friday night, and I was watching it again just before we went on the air. And Freddie Rodriguez, an actor who's on 6 Feet Under,
was
a guest, and he was a guest just before this guy came out with his jetpack. And Kimmel was saying, "Did you ever have these dreams?" And he was talking about, not exactly. He says, "But I've got this balcony overlooking my pool, and I've always really wanted to just leap off of it and fly into the pool." And I thought, okay, all right, you're close. You're not there with the rest of us, but you're close,
right?
So what is you mentioned a couple things a minute ago. What is the real origin of our modern jetpack envy? I mean, is it I mean, in my mind, I kind of blame Walter Cronkite and Walt Disney.
Yeah, those are certainly worthy targets of your wrath. I think that in working on this, most folks I spoke with who could even be considered sort of jetpack historians or experts, they all point to a 1928 pulp magazine called Amazing Stories. The magazine launched a bit before that, but in a 1928 issue, Buck Rogers made his debut in a novella in there. At that point, he was known as Anthony Rogers, and luckily the author had the good sense later on to change it to the much cooler sounding Buck. But so Anthony Rogers debuted in 1928, and he was sort of the first guy to fly around with one of these things, and so most people point to that moment as being when, on a large scale, there was the sort of popular awareness of the technology, and I think also, in going back to what you were asking before, that also plays a role in why we're so obsessed with it is because, in most versions or renditions of jetpacks that we see in pop culture productions, they're just extremely cool looking, and that was certainly true of the original Buck Rogers jetpack. So, besides the fact that, I'm sure it's bound up in why, as a youngster and you see this thing for the first time, that's partly why it's so appealing, is it just looks so damn cool. And so, it was in 28 that sort of the idea was launched, and then it's been featured over and over and over again in movies and TV and advertising and all over the place. It's really just become this iconic piece of technology, I think more so even than any of the other similar things that we also think of as being part of this future that we've still yet to see.
Mm-hmm. And I want to clarify. I want to clarify what I was saying. I mentioned Walter Cronkite and Walt Disney because in my mind, Cronkite. There used to be a show. This will definitely date me, but there was a show that he did in I think sometime in the '60s. It was like I can't remember the title. Maybe It's something about the 21st century, and he would always spotlight these likely inventions and things. And in my mind, I'm thinking that may have been the first place I saw the jetpack. I also am old enough to have been at the '64 World Series. In Flushing Meadow, and so I know the reference from that, and then Disney, the Epcot Center, and you make reference in the book Tomorrowland and stuff. I honestly can't recall if there was the jetpack there in terms of the design, but I make that's the connection that I make in my mind too.
Yeah, no, all those things you just described are huge touchstones. So in '64, I know Bell Labs did a number of exhibitions at the World's Fair that year in Flushing. Did it also fly at did you say the World Series or the World Fair? You mean that you
World's
attended?
Fair.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
World's Fair.
Yeah, that for sure is a huge moment. I think there's a great photo in the book from the Daily News of a Bell pilot, coming around the huge globe sculpture. Yeah. Which I just feel like you look at that, and that at that moment, not only was that the future, but it was there. It was living, and there was no reason why it wouldn't be that way for all of us, and not too long from then. And yet here we are now, 40 plus years later, or close to 50, I guess. And the technology has not advanced really significantly beyond what they were flying at that World's Fair, although it's not for lack of trying, certainly. And there are at least 2 or 3 companies I'm aware of that claim to be right on the verge of real breakthroughs. And you may have read about some of these guys either online or in the news. But there's a company in Denver and another one in California that hope to even get something on the market, I think as early as the end of next year, 2009. And at that point, I think it'll still be, if they're lucky, they'll be able to extend the flight time beyond what they have now, which is essentially like 20 or 25 seconds, and get it, much closer to talking in terms of minutes than seconds. But even at that point, I think, they'll be producing so few of them that the cost will be pretty much out of the range of anyone who's, not Sir Richard Branson or Bill Gates or whoever else wants to risk it up there in the sky.
Well, the guy on Kimmel, I felt.
Yeah, do you remember who that was? I wanted to ask because I didn't catch that.
His name was Eric something. Scott. He's Eric Scott.
Yeah,
fairly young guy. He was saying, introducing at the beginning of the segment, that he would be able to fly for 33 seconds, right, and that the tank was hydrogen peroxide. Hydrogen peroxide.
That's the fuel exactly. And it gets pressurized and sent over a silver catalyst pack that sort of acts as the engine and becomes exactly. He
said that he expected that they would be in production within a year, and he was so excited, and Kimmel was excited. You could just see that Kimmel really wanted this to work because he wanted he wanted to own one. He said, I want to buy one of these. And so everybody backs up and everybody puts in their earplugs, and it looks like all the other jetpacks,
Right.
He's got his arms, his elbows out and his hands on the controls, and he starts it, and there's all this smoke or steam, whatever it is, coming out of the pack, and you see him go up about 2 feet and come down and then go up, and it's just blowing all the dust, and it's like, oh, and then nothing. And then, so they came back to him after they hosed him down with the fire retardant materials, and the poor guy looked like he was just wishing he was dead. He was just, I don't know if he was more embarrassed that he was on network television.
So it didn't work nearly as well, it sounds like, as it has before, because this is the same pilot, who recently was all over the news for flying across some huge gorge in Colorado, which was
exactly
very impressive.
And it was just, I felt terrible for him, and imagine his investors and the people who were expecting to ramp up. And Kimmel, God bless him, Kimmel said, look, we'll wait. Can you figure? He said, no, it'll take too long to figure out, what went wrong. And Kimmel said, come back next week. We'll do it again. I want this to work.
Oh, man. Well, that's interesting. That's good to know. I didn't realize, it seems like weekly I become aware of someone else who's sort of obsessed with this stuff too, whether they're a celeb or an average citizen. But, I didn't know Kimmel had the passion. That's good to know.
Yeah. Now, there's a picture of you in the book with your hands on one of these. You're strapped into one, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
You said that's as close as you've come to flying. I mean, if one of these guys, would you strap in and actually fly? I'm not sure that I would. I just want one. But would you fly in one?
Yeah. That I guess is the $1 million question. I think, going into working on the book, absolutely, I totally believed that, the last few pages would be about me finally getting in the air, and, that was always part of the plan. As I write about, there are sort of obstacles even beyond the immense problems of physics and gravity. Other sort of things factor in, like you're mentioning the time I tried on a machine built by a guy in Mexico, Juan Lozano, and so going down there, I thought I might have a good shot at least trying one of his jetpacks, either if nothing else, then maybe on a safety wire, because he's got a huge yard and he makes his own fuel and he's got the whole deal set up nicely. But by the time I got down there, Juan, about a month or so before I got down there, had really banged himself up terribly testing out what he calls a rocket bike, which is essentially a bicycle with an 1,100 horsepower rocket welded to the side of it.
I like that too.
Juan liked it. He still likes it, I think, but he had really spilled on the thing terribly, and so was the weekend that I went down to see him. He almost barely at all got out of the lazy boy he was in. So then those dreams were dashed at that trip, and other times along the way there was just destiny intervened in cruel ways. But yeah, so at this moment it still hasn't happened. I maintain that if I'm ever in position to do it, I have to at this point. Although my wife is less sure that I have to.
Again, it's a guy thing.
Yeah. So, which is a little bit ironic, since she's much more into roller coasters, the Cyclone down on Coney Island, than I am. Like, I hate that stuff, but man, I just have to try it at least once.
I was gonna, you start the book with a description of getting in a Cessna, I think, and your pilot says, do you want to try 0G? And I'm like, no. And have you done a hot air balloon?
Gosh, have I? I know I've done when I was a kid. I did a helicopter ride, and I feel like I did, but I would surely remember much more vividly. Now, maybe I've only thought about it a lot, because I don't think I've actually been in a balloon. But yeah, I had so many kids' books. At least in my house, had whether it was balloons or planes, or I talk about in my book about this kid's book we read a lot called "The Fool of the World and the Flying Ship," which was like a Russian folk tale that involved what it sounds like a ship that took to the sky. So it's just I would definitely just remember looking at photos of things like balloons, and it was just so powerful and transfixing, But I don't think I've actually been in one.
Let me come back to the balloon in a moment. We've got a call for you. Let's go to them. Hi, do you have a question or comment for Mac?
Yeah, I was watching a Discovery Channel show, I believe, last week, and it was on the James Bond 007 stunts. Mm-hmm. In one of the James Bond movies, there was a jetpack featured.
Thunderball.
Thunderball, okay.
Yeah, that's.
Did you catch that show?
I didn't see the show, but Thunderball is a big touchstone, also pop culture touchstone for these guys. But was the show good? What were they?
I liked that they delved into some of the background and some of the some of the history, as how they decided to use this stunt in the movie. But they didn't get into the technical aspects, and they didn't go into it as deep as I had hoped.
And what were some of the other pieces of technology that they got into?
Well, it was we don't use any character generation back in those days, so this was all live stuntmen doing these stunts. Yeah. Some of the engineering and some of the, we got to use this cable and try to, blend it in so people don't see it in the movie. And,
right.
Yet there were examples of where the technology was used successfully in a real life person flying this thing around, and it fascinated me that the movie people used it, but they only need to use it for seconds at a time.
Exactly. Yeah, and the guy who did the actual flying in that film was a Bell Labs pilot named Bill Souter, who figures prominently in the book, and he worked on a couple other films and TV shows too. And so yeah, they were for the film they borrowed the machines from Bell and borrowed their pilots too.
Well, let me ask the caller. If I came to your house in an hour and said, I've got a jetpack, do you want to take it up for a ride? Would you do it?
I'd do it if there were some additional safety measures deployed. Like for example, there's going to be a limit to how far and how fast I can fly, and how far and fast I'm going to fall.
Yeah, I think well put, sir. Well put.
I think either of you guys, I'm guessing that, Mac, you've probably seen it. Either of you guys seen the movie The Rocketeer? I know it's in the book.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
No, I've never seen the movie, but I've seen some clips.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned, of course, what goes up must come down.
Yeah.
The guy playing the Rocketeer, Bill. I can't think of his last name. He comes down awful hard almost every time, and you're thinking, wow, okay, there's a flip side to what goes up, because it looks great while he's flying around, he's zipping and just doing all kinds of things. But boy, when that thing runs out of gas,
yeah, it's a bit of an issue because none of the machines that I'm aware of that have been developed have incorporated, any kind of parachuting or other sort of safety precaution like that. So you're absolutely right that there's not a lot of room for error.
Well, did we answer your question? And
yes, you did. Thanks for taking my call.
Great. Thanks very much for calling in. Appreciate it. That will free up a line if anyone else wants to come in and get on this conversation about the book Jetpack Dreams and your own Jetpack Dreams. Give us a call, 1-646-595-3135. I asked you about the hot air balloons before, and I came upon a tape. I actually have it in front of me. 1983. It's a cassette recording of me up in a hot air balloon. I'm not going to play it here because it's mostly a lot of girlish screaming, but that is, I guess, about as close as I'll probably ever get to getting in a jetpack, because you get in there and it's like they set off the engine, or I'm sorry, not the engine, but I guess it's basically an engine, and up you go with a whoop. And it was the single most frightening moment of my life, I think.
How high? Do you remember about how high you got?
It was really high.
Yeah.
No, I don't know exactly how. It's probably on the tape. It was a painter who I knew who was a big enthusiast of these things. And come on, you ought to come out here and you can write about it. No, I'll take you up for free. We charge a lot of money to do this. Come on up and do it. And I was like, yeah, okay. Well, I hadn't really thought it out very carefully.
Yeah, similarly, I feel like a similar thing happened when I got out there to see Will in Belfast, and I knew he was into this stuff, and that we had talked about maybe going out to fly that day, but then when you're in it, it's a whole other deal, and I'd never been up in one of those things. I think first time, it's definitely a bit of a shock to the system, go ahead.
No. To say, Mac, tell us a little bit. There are some real people in the book who are really into this and have put a lot of time and energy. People like Wendell Moore and Hal Graham. Tell folks a little bit about who these people are and where they fit into the whole Jetpack Dream issue.
Okay, well, the two guys you mentioned are massively important to all this stuff, and in fact, I sort of consider Wendell Moore the godfather of jetpacks. He was a Bell Labs engineer in the 50s and 60s, and very much so the first guy who sort of took this idea out of the realm of pop culture. He was obsessed with Buck Rogers growing up, and tried to make it real in the real world. So he it was while working on Bell's supersonic jet projects that he sort of lit on this idea for an engine that was both small enough to be worn on a guy's back and powerful enough to get him off the ground. And he was going back and forth between Bell campus in upstate New York and out in California in the Mojave Desert. And he was out in the desert when he sort of lit on this idea and brought it back to the Bell campus and got down to business almost immediately. And it's just I think his story is just so incredible and inspiring in a lot of ways, because there was no blueprint for this. He was making it up, and there was really no funding either. I mean, they did get some government funding, but it was minor compared to what other Bell programs were getting. So they literally went around and borrowed and stole parts from other departments, just plucking things off the shelves there, and slapped together a prototype. I think they used, some guys like motorcycle handlebars and parts from a kid's bike and a lot of duct tape to get together early prototypes. And on the one hand, it's like, yeah, the stuff only flew for about 20 seconds. How great is that? But on the other hand, man, he built something that flew for 20 seconds, out of thin air, literally. So I just find him absolutely remarkable, and he's a great character too. Just not an easy guy. I spoke at length with his daughter, and she described him, just being sort of dogged and determined and obsessed with whatever he was into, and very much a guy who worked hard and played hard and all that stuff. And sometimes that meant there wasn't a ton of time left over for the family, but that's who he was, and he was just absolutely driven to create. And then Hal Graham was he worked at Bell for many years and working on different projects, and I think always worked that kind of crappy hours. So at one point he was just fed up and had sort of given up, and I think even resigned from Bell and was looking to do other things when a call came in asking if he wanted to work on a new exciting project. And he ended up being the first pilot to fly free. I think it was April 20th or 21st of 1961 that Bell their first flight off of a safety wire occurred, and that was Hal Graham flying. And there's just incredible, excitement. The whole team gathered around near the airport in Niagara, and for folks that are obsessed with this stuff, that date is as important as the day we landed on the moon. They'll point to that and say that was the moment where a dream became reality, basically. And so yeah, those two folks, as important as anyone else to this story. I mentioned Bill Souter before, who flew in the James Bond movie and flew in in Lost in Space, and all over the world did demonstrations. And he's I think still Eric Scott's closing in, but I think Bill Souter still has the most flights of anyone, just in terms of numbers. I think it's over 1,200 in his life, exhibition flights. Wow. And he was another Bell pilot, and when he started there, he was all of 19 years old, and at that point, Bell was hoping to demonstrate to the military that an average teenager with minimal or no flying experience could come in and learn how to use their machine. And it was because of his lack of experience that he was brought on by Wendell Moore to be a test pilot, and then ultimately sort of became the guy most associated with Bell's work. And they're all featured very prominently in the book, and just all have in their ways remarkable and great stories to tell, I found.
Do you think that there are still pockets of American industry where corporations are funding crazy research projects like Bell Lab? I mean, Bell. If you ever want to learn something interesting about American technological history, you just look into what Bell Labs did, or the Xerox Labs, or things like that. Do you think there's still much of that going on in places around the country?
Yeah, it's I think a great question, and it's hard to know for sure. What I found in my sense is that it isn't happening in that same way, in sort of, in a broad corporate way. That even then, it was, while it was happening at Bell, it was still sort of on the DL. It was a bit of a underfunded and less sort of impressive to the Bell execs project. So, it's a little complicated, but I think that, to the extent that it did go on before, it was still sort of done by rebels and renegades and not part of the sort of higher profile projects. And so I think, now when you think about it in those terms, then I guess it makes sense that, now it's just sort of somewhat disappeared entirely, that sort of same spirit. And I think with either tech companies or space exploration companies or any of these other things, that there's so much funding and at stake and other things at stake that it's hard to picture sort of, any sort of significant or real investment in something which you describe sort of aptly as crazy. So it is unfortunate though, because, it's so sort of wonderful and magical in its way. And so, but the other side of it is, that these guys who we alluded to earlier, sort of all over the world are taking up the mantle themselves and doing the work themselves and actually making some pretty incredible progress. So, it seems like the will to do this stuff will win out. It's just a question of how and where. And it's still going on. It's just remarkable.
As you've been going around and promoting the book, talking about, and I'll mention the book again, Jetpack Dreams, I imagine you've met a lot of interesting guys, mostly guys, I'm thinking.
For sure.
What are some of the stranger things you've heard from people relative to this?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. Part of a big reason why I was excited to work on this, besides the idea that I might find a working jetpack, was that it was kind of guaranteed going in that, you'd encounter some wonderful, eccentric, passionate folks, and that was absolutely true. I mentioned Juan Lozano, and he lives in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and has built a small fleet of what he calls rocket belts, and I call jetpacks. But I think maybe this isn't that crazy, but it struck me as a little crazy that we were talking about hydrogen peroxide, which he distills and uses for fuel, like most of the folks who are building this stuff, and as Wendell Moore did. And so he has a huge, like the size of a large refrigerator, I guess, this machine that is his, fuel distillation machine. And we were talking a lot about hydrogen peroxide, and he has just this evangelical feeling towards this stuff. For him, it's kind of like a magic elixir. And, he said, at one point he told me, and I was down there with a friend, that he read on some medical websites. He showed me the printouts, and they looked a little fishy to me. But he said he read that it can be helpful for humans to even like drink a little of the stuff daily. So he and like a lot of his family, I think in very small doses. And then I kind of jokingly was like, "Oh, but what, do you put it in like your grandson's baby bottle, And he looked at me very seriously. It was like, "Yes, just a couple drops." And I just thought that was really kind of nuts. But the kid was cute and seemed okay, so maybe there's something to it. But so there was that. The guy I met outside of London, lives in Sussex, Stuart Ross. There wasn't any one thing exactly he told me that was that nuts, but just like his whole like existence I found fascinating. I mean, he's a guy, and I think you can go on YouTube maybe and catch the clip, but he had maybe the worst to date sort of near-death experience trying out his machine in his backyard, where the throttle valve got stuck open, and so too much fuel was rushing to the engine, and just he looked just like a plastic bag being blown around in the footage and slams into this fence and somehow, emerged mostly intact. And so, yeah, just to be out there and like see the place that happened, and then also see how that's done nothing. I'm sure he's like a little tentative, but more or less it's done nothing to sort of dampen his enthusiasm for it. And he's got this great elaborate setup out in his backyard too, where he tests it and where he orders the fuel to be delivered. There's like this Swedish scientist who distills fuel and sends it all over the world to these obsessives, and so Stuart gets his fuel from this guy, and he showed us the huge crates with all this hydrogen peroxide that he stores. And I mean, it's amazing because you talk to him, and in many ways he just seems like an average sort of level-headed fellow. He's a commercial airline pilot, and I would totally trust him to like fly me around the world, and yet you scratch the surface a little bit, and there's some really bizarre stuff happening in his backyard, So, yeah, I mean, I think as we've sort of hinted at, and you can sort of guess that this is, anyone who's deep enough into this stuff, there's going to be quite a bit of eccentricity involved, and I certainly found that to be true with pretty much everyone I encountered.
While you were talking, I was looking at your website, which I want to give out the URL. You can get there at www.jetpackdreams.com. Solid, jetpackdreams.com. I see that Andy Samberg from Saturday Night Live wants a jetpack.
Yeah, that's what one of the guys I was thinking of when you were talking about Jimmy Kimmel, too, that I just saw. Where did I see it? I think the New York Times did something asking folks about their favorite web videos of the year, and he talked about a jetpack video he'd seen online, and did a short spiel on how much he loves them. So, yeah, I mean, it just comes up all the time. I haven't thought about this connection before, but now that we're talking about it, it does seem like comedians, like a lot of comedians are really drawn to this. Like on the Daily Show and on the Colbert Show, it's like a go-to punchline. So often it comes up like almost monthly. It seems like one of them will make a jetpack allusion or joke. So I don't know what that says, but comedians really love jetpacks.
Jeez. Now, I also see, looking at the site, it looks like you have an appearance coming up this week in Brooklyn.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Thanks for mentioning. I'm going to be reading as part of what sounds like a really great series. It's only, I think, the second installment of it, but this group puts on, at bars around town, and it combines live music and readings and other delights, I believe. So it's going to be, this one is Friday the 19th, this coming Friday at a bar called Matchless in Greenpoint. And yeah, I think you can check online, but I think things get started maybe around 9-ish or so, and probably go pretty late. So if you're in the borough, you should definitely swing by.
Cool. Well, so before we wrap up, what are you working on next? Another book, magazine work?
Yeah, a little
airline piloting. What are you doing?
A little of all of that. I have an idea, very early stages, for another book project, but it's so early I'm not even sure what's going to happen with it. I can say that it's not going to be "Where's my damn hovercraft?" It's going to be the idea is pretty different from this.
Good question, though.
Yeah. Also. Definitely, obviously, like something I'm hugely passionate about, but a pretty different idea, and I'd love to, once it's farther along, we can chat about it maybe. All right. But that's the main thing. Yeah, I'm focusing on now is just trying to figure out if this other project can fly.
Okay. Oh. Hey, and I have to ask you because the name really caught my attention. You have a daughter named Una. Is that the only Una that I know? And I was a student of. I studied a lot of Charlie Chaplin. Is right. Una O'Neill Chaplin?
Yep. Well, let's see. Una O'Neill Chaplin did figure into us settling on that. My wife is from a big Irish family, and we, we're just sort of casting around for any name that we liked, but with sort of minimal criteria. Although when you have the last name Montandon, I made the case early on that that's such an unwieldy damn name that you need something short, and I thought that something that ends with a vowel sounded best. So that was all we had going in. And then my wife, Catherine, she saw, it wasn't the Una O'Neill mentioned, but she did see this name, and we just loved it. We loved the way it looked and sounded and everything. And then our only concern was that it wasn't like a real name, that it was kind of too hippie sounding. And so then we dug a little more, and when we came across the Una O'Neill reference, then that sort of legitimized it. We were like, okay, well, if it's good enough for you, Gene O'Neill, it's good enough for us. And then it was only later we learned that it's still a very, very popular name in Ireland with a spelling that involves many more G's and H's, but a slightly different spelling. But there are still a bunch of Unas over there.
Well, I had to squeeze in a non-jetpack question before we ended, and I was very interested in that one. Well, folks, you can order Mac Montandon's delightful Flight of the Imagination, Jetpack Dreams, at great bookstores everywhere, or online from Amazon.com, or even MrMedia.com, MRmedia.com. And Mac, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation. I want my damn jetpack. I want to get that in one.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
My pleasure. Good luck with it, and I hope we'll get to talk again soon.
All right, take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And folks, for more author interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with A.J. Jacobs, David Michaelis, David Wild, Larry Ratso-Sloman, Peter Gollenbach, Joe Pistone, who you may know as Donnie Brasco, Legs McNeil, and many, many more. Please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, Pointer Online, Digital Journal, Podcast Pickle, Vox, Folio, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, Kindle, or iTunes. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@Andelman, ANDELMAN.com. Thanks so much for joining us today. I always appreciate when you give up a little piece of your day to spend it with us.